Hello everyone. Welcome to our week 5 Tuesday lecture. Yeah, I can see that more people are joining us, so perhaps we can. So how was your weekend? Like, how is everyone's weekend? Unbelievable, it's already week 5 now, so almost halfway through this term. So let's wait for 2 more minutes for everyone to join us. Can everyone hear me? Those online and in the theater, can you all hear me? Yep, great, thank you. Okay, so let's get started. So last week, I hope you all enjoyed Rob's lecture, the guest lecture. Myself really enjoyed that. He talked a lot about various stuff, like how working as a software engineering looks like different aspects of working as a software engineering, more than just coding and programming. So I think it's very insightful. So if you missed the Rob's guest lecture from last week, you can have a look at his recordings. It's really helpful. It was great. So today, I will have the second lecture on HTTP servers. Last week, Wednesday, Jake talked a little bit about servers, HTTP servers. But I think we need to finish this because this is very important for our iteration 2. Right. So our iteration 2 was released last Saturday night. So if you haven't have a look at it, we always suggest you to get started as early as possible. And HTTP is a very important part of iteration 2. So I think we deserve another lecture to talk more about HTTP servers today. Okay, so let's quick catch up on what Jake has already talked about last week, and then we can going ahead talk about the new items. Okay, so networks, right? So network is basically a group of interconnected computers that can communicate. And internet is a level above network, that a global infrastructure for networking computers. And World Wide Web is more like a system of documents and resources linked together and accessible via URL, like what we are doing right now. We look at YouTube and the others. A quick recap. Okay, so that's it. So this lecture is about HTTP servers. So what is HTTP? So HTTP is actually one example of network protocols. Okay, so it is the protocol of the web. So what is protocol? So protocol is basically a standard way of communication, like in a language that different clients or servers or everything that they can understand here. So it's a structure so that everyone can understand. Okay, so different structures are used for different type of communication. And here we talk about HTTP because web browsers are applications to request and receive HTTP. Okay. Yeah, so this is more about like what is HTTP. So HTTP is one example of those protocols. Okay. So another concept here, very important, is web server. So what is a web server? So iteration 2 will be working on HTTP servers. So it's also important to know what is web server. So web server is a software application that runs on a computer, and it serves the content over the internet or over local network. So web server can be just a laptop or a computer or a larger system, but it's just a software application that runs on computer. Okay, so the primary focus, the primary aim of a web server is to deliver web pages or other content to the web servers that request it. Web browser, sorry. So deliver web pages or other contents to the web browsers that request it. So this is what web servers do. Okay, so for example, when a user requests a web page, their browser will send a request to that web server over the internet. And that web server then process that request and retrieve the information, the proper content, and then send it back to the user's browser as an HTTP response. Okay. So the web servers use HTTP to communicate with the web browser and other clients, as we just mentioned. So what about we? So I think Jake also briefly mentioned about this part. So we are going to have a local server, web server, that we are going to use Node.js Express server. So let's have a quick look at this example that we already had a look at it last week. So this line just let us import the Express library that we are using to have the Express server. Okay, and here one important thing is the port here. So port is basically like the rows, like a port. So we can look at here, like a port is essentially one of the rows in and out of computer's network. Okay, so if the road is busy, like for example, one is already using that port and you are trying to use that port at the same time, then we will have a conflict. Okay, so this is important because some of you, or many of you may be using VLab. So I already noticed some students, some groups already started on iteration 2, and they found that when they are using a port like 3000, it's not working because it indicates that like there's a conflict because somebody else is using that port at the same time. So when that happens, it's best to have a try other ports. Okay, so you can choose, for example, 1001, 3001, 3002. So just whatever you want, but try to avoid under 1000 because some there are some reserved ports that are used for some standard things. Okay, so just to clarify, like what a port is, like a port is for a web server. A port for web server is a number. It's just a number that used to identify a specific service or application run on that server. Okay, so when a client, such as we are using web browser, when we make a request to the web server, it includes a port number along with the IP address, so that we can specify like which service or application on that server we want to connect to. So this is what port does. Okay, so we might quite often see port 3000. It's a very commonly used port number for many reasons. For example, so first of all, the port 3000 is not reserved, so there's a less chance of conflicts. Okay, and another thing is that, so for example, Express server, the default port is 3000. So it's also another reason of why this port 3000 is commonly used, but you can use whatever more than 1000. Okay. So this line is just expressed that it's required in order for the data of many requests to be interpreted. So this standard. And here we are having we are indicating the URL that we want to access to call this function. We'll have a try. We will have a play with this code very soon. So you can have a look like how this URL works. And this line actually starts that server. So only if you have this line, your server is started. on a particular port, so port here, as we defined here. So it is essentially runs an infinite loop, so it's never stopped unless we terminate it. Okay. Okay, so let's have a look at the code. Let me close this, and this. It's here. Okay, so this is the code. So basically it's exactly the same as what we see on the slide. Okay, so what if I want to run it? It's called xprice basics.ts. As you may not have noticed, that is a TypeScript code. So it's the way we run it is using npm run ts node. Okay, so let's run. Oops. Okay, so let's try again. Oh, sorry. So this is let's have a look at here, and I will copy paste again. Okay. Okay. All right. No worries. Let's have a look at this npm install. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I've seen in the chat. Shall we quickly fix it? Okay. I think we have a lot of contents now. But all right, we will have a look at another example very soon. So don't bother to take that time. Okay, sure. So the example we have seen here is a very standard way of how we start a server on a local host. Okay, but shall we try again? Should work. Doesn't make sense here. Did I change something before the lecture? npm run ts node. Okay, we will come back to this very soon, but sorry about that. So let's move on. Okay, so the next very important concept here is called API. So you might all have heard about what API is. Okay, so API is the full name of API is Application Programming Interface. So you might have heard of the name API, but you might not really know what is API. So it's absolutely fine, but we'll explain here. So there are many examples of API. So let's have a before explaining the definition, so let's have a look at one example. So what if I search on Google, like how is the weather today at Sydney? So this is what we have seen here. So it's the weather. So this is actually Google is calling a weather API here to display this weather information. But it's not generated directly by Google. It's Google using an API to show this information. So this is an API. And also we have other like examples of API. So for example, when we log in or when we log out, it's also we call the API. So for example, Facebook login, Facebook login API. Okay. So here, these are examples of API. So login API, what it does is basically every time the application loads, it uses the API to check whether the user is already logged in. And if not, when the user click login using, for example, Google or whatever, the button, then a pop-up opens, and the user will be asked to put in some information to make sure that they can log in. So this is how we use those APIs. So it's very commonly used. Okay, it's actually. So the most common uses of API is for web APIs, and the two examples we have shown earlier are web APIs, and it refers to a contract that a particular service provides. And the interface of the service acts as a black box and indicate that for particular endpoints and given particular input, the client can expect to receive particular output. Okay, so does it sound very similar to functions, like black box functions? Like you give it an input and you can get an output. So it's very similar. It's just kind of more complex than functions. Okay, so we talk about server, and in between of the server and the browser, which we mean here is the clients here, we can use API. So for example, clients can be, or the browser can be like users who want to access information from the web. Okay. The client can be a user, but can also be a software system that uses that API. Okay, and we also have a server here who can return the resources, all the information to the browser or the client. And the API here is kind of a gateway between the client and the resources on the web. Okay. Okay, so the machine that gives the resources to the client is here the server. The server basically gives the resource through the API to the client. Okay. And RESTful API is very commonly used, very popular one. That it's an application program, and we can also say it's it's like architecture. It's a framework. And the APIs that follow the REST architecture style are called REST API. So here we call it RESTful API. So we can also call it just REST API. It's the same. It's just different name and different ways of we use it. And so the full so REST is actually a software architecture, as we mentioned, that it imposes condition on how an API should work. Okay, so there are some standard way of using RESTful API, and the most important or commonly used, or basically what we are going to touch, are these HTTP method, which include post, and the operation related to this post method is just create something. And get is read. We are going to talk a lot more about get, like how we use the get method in RESTful API today. And put is how like we update information, update resources, and delete is just delete. Okay, so we call this as CRUD operations. So they are referred to the CRUD operations. Okay, so another example. So different CRUD property require different approaches for input. Okay, so these are the method, and different method will require different way, like different type of input, but all output are the same. Like we always return JSON. We talked about JSON before in week 3, I think. Perhaps. Okay, so let's have a look at this code. I already have it here, and this one, it should work. Okay, it's the same. I just copy and paste the code from the slides and to here. Okay, so now we can actually have a look how we start a server and how, okay. Okay, so when we run this code, when we run this TS code, when we run this cron, so what will display here is listening on port 3001. And the reason is that I have defined to use port 3001. Okay, but we can always change to anything else. Okay, so let's leave this alone. Just look at this very basic one at the moment. And what happens here is, let's have a new one. I'll close HTTP localhost. So this is how we use localhost, and we put port number here, which should be 3001. Okay, so the reason that it shows that cannot get is because the URL we define here is called /apple, but we do not have anything that just with a slash. So what we are going to do is we put /apple. Okay, so we are showing we can see magic word from the browser. So this means that we have already started this server and it's listening on this port, like listening on port 3001. You do not need to understand like how we get this message. We'll explain very soon. Okay, but we can have a play with this code. So now we have /apple. So what about if we have pineapple? Does it spell like this? Okay, so I will change it here as pineapple. Cool. So it's not showing anything. The reason is that we need to restart this server. So we need to terminate this server via this command. So it doesn't stop by itself. When we start this server, it will be an indefinite, it will be there forever unless we terminate it. Okay, so let's have a try again, like after we have changed the code and refresh the page. Yeah, so this is what we can see here. Okay, a question asked in the chat, like, can Red sense error message? Good question. We'll talk about testing very soon, like at the end of this lecture. So this is how we access the specific URL and how we start its server. Okay, so we can always play a little bit here. I will make it even simpler. So, hi, Yuchao. Thanks for sending the apples. Okay, so let's have a look what happens. So I need to terminate this and restart that again and go to Apple. Okay, what it shows here is, hi Yuchao, thanks for sending the apple. Okay, so let's get back to here. So what if we have something like this? What it basically does is that it takes in a variable called name and use it when we console log, when we send this message to the browser. Okay, so how can we get this value of the name? The way we do that is through a question mark here, and we put name equals Yuchao. Okay, so this is how we do it, and we'll directly show like, hi Yuchao, thanks for sending the apple. Okay, are you all good till now? Any questions? That's cool. Yeah, I know. So what if we have more information here? Name 1 and name 2. Name 1. Hi, name 1 and name 2. Thanks for sending the apples. Okay, so I need to 1 and 2. So this is And let's have another look. So name 1 equals Yuchao and name 2 equals Jake. Doesn't work because I need to have the server start again. Yeah, so this is because I changed the code, right? And we refresh the page. And what we need to do is name 1 equals Yuchao and name 2 equals Jake. Can't get, oh, the reason is that we have pineapple here. So we need to have pineapple. Yes, so this is how it looks like. Hi, Yuchao and Jake, thanks for sending the apple. A question in the chat, like, can I see the URL again? Yes, sure, of course. So I will copy and paste here so it looks. So this is the URL, okay? So it's HTTP localhost and the port that we are using and the URL that we want to get, we want to read from, we want to get. So this is pineapple and a question mark here and the 2 variables here, like name 1 equals Yuchao and name 2 equals Jake. Okay? So this is how it looks like. All good? Okay, so I will delete here. So as we have seen before in the slide here, so there are 4 different methods. So what we have seen just now is called get. So basically what we are doing is we read. So the clients get to access resources that are located at a specific URL that we have just seen, like apple or pineapple. So this is we are trying to locate it at a specified URL on the server. Okay, so we have tried to use get. So what about the other method? So so let's have a try post. Okay, so what post does is the clients use post to send data to the server. So in addition to we get information read from the server, we can also send information to the data. But we are going to see that it's different. So the URL here is called orange. Okay, it won't work, but I will show you. It's called orange. Okay, so what we get here is cannot get orange, right? So get is the method. It works when we get pineapple, the URL pineapple, but we cannot get orange because we do not have app.getOrange. What we have here is app.postOrange. Okay, and this is the same for others like push or delete. Okay, we cannot also like put in information from the URL here. So it's different. So what we can get is only through this get. Okay. Yes. There's the message in the chat. Like I'm guessing when there's a cannot get orange, they mean they cannot read orange. It's just different method here. Okay, so different operations here. So get here is referring to the get method. And with get method, we do not have this orange. So we can always change this to orange and let's try to see if it works though. Okay, so now let's go to orange. Yeah, so you can see that with the same URL here, but with different method, they can be together. Okay, so they can, yeah, so this is the method, the different way of we using the method. Okay, so this is the code that we have just shown, and we also talk a lot about this. So get and delete, we get input through query. So what we have seen in the code here. Okay, so we have query.name1 and query.name2, right? But for put and delete, we use body. Okay, so it's a different way of getting input for different method. But for output, it should be packed up as JSON, so it's the same. Okay. Yeah, so let's have a look at this code again. So as we have seen here, we have JSON.string file, and here we have JSON parse, like we decode the JSON, we decode it into like JavaScript structure. We also have JSON.string file. So it's also work if we do not have JSON string file. So if we only have a string here. So for example, let's have a look. If we do not have JSON string file, we only have a string. Oops. Thanks for sending the apple. Okay. We only have a string. But basically, what I want to show here is that even though we do not have JSON string file, we only have a string here. It will work the same, nothing different. But with JSON, we can have more structure. So for example, we can have name1, name2, and more information here. But if we only put a string here, it will only display the string in the browser. Okay. But if everyone's using JSON string file, a lot of JSON.parse, there should be a way of making this code a lot more easier, right? So the way we use that is here. So we need to use a different package, like we need to use app.use express.json. Instead of here, what we use is .text. Okay, so we in a different way, but they are doing exactly the same. So after we have changed that, so there are some other differences. So let me make it easier to look. Okay, so instead of our .send, we can have .json as here. Okay, and similarly, instead of send JSON string file, we can also have REST JSON. Okay, it just makes the code a little bit easy to write, easy to read, but they are working exactly the same. Okay, so let's terminate this server for now. Okay, so any questions? Okay, so this slide is just showing what we have just seen. Okay. Cool. So yeah, as we have already terminated this server and we want to get access to this localhost 3000 and Orange, it won't work, right? So using localhost is very useful for developers, for us as a software engineers, because before we deploy our application or web services online on the internet for everyone to use, it would be better that we test everything, that we look everything locally and make sure everything works as what we want it to before we put it on online for everyone to use. Okay, so we have just seen the Express server, so it's very useful and easy to use way to use. So Express server, I'm not sure. if I've shown you. Express server is here. Express. Okay, so it's also available through NPM. I think the link is also in the slide, so you can also get access to the link from the slides. So that will be easier for you. Yes, it's here. Okay. So here are also some examples, as well as how, if you want to play locally with the code, so you can also follow the guidelines and use that library. Okay, so this is it. Okay, so how can we talk to a web server as a client? We have seen how we use get method, like to access resources located at a specified URL on the server. But how can we talk to a web server as a client? So there are multiple ways of doing that. The first one is called API client. So, and we also have web browser and NPM library. So we have a very quick look at the API client. So the commonly used one are called ARC and Postman. So in previous term, when we had exams, we might need to use that for the exam. Okay, so it's kind of a tool that can visualize, so we can see specifically what we put there and what we get. Okay, and you can also download and install ARC locally. So the way that we do that is we use ARC client. Okay, so this is how it looks. But now in this term, we do not have exams, meaning that it's optional. So you can play with it if you are interested in, but so this is how it looks like. Okay, so the way we do that is we Google ARC client. Okay, and you can follow the guideline and play around. Okay, but what we are going to talk a little more today is this one. So how can we use code to send information to the server? Okay, this is also very important when we want to test. It's very similar to what we did before the black box test with Jest. Like, did you remember? Like we used to have NPM Jest test. So it's very similar to that. I've got a question in the chat. Like, how did you get the link? Which link? Did you mean the Express server? It's in the slide. Okay. Okay. How did you get the link for localhost? So this is the question from the chat. Like, how did we get the link for the localhost? Okay, so let's go back to this again. All right. So how did we get link? So first of all, we need to know that which port we are using. Okay. So for example, now we are listening on port 3001 because we defined to use 3001 here, right? And we can put 3001 here. And the way that we know more details about the URL is through what we define here. So as we define here, we have /apple, and we put /apple. Okay. So this is how we get the URL. We do not have, because we are running this code 4.2 TypeScript, so TS. So here we have pineapple. So the way we get this QRL is through what we define here. So we have pineapple. and it will show the message that we want. And for more detail about the URL, because we have like query.name1, meaning that we can put in some value for name1, and for example, we can have Yuchao. So this is how we get a URL. So then we can get hi Yuchao, thanks for sending the apples, and this is the URL. Okay, all good. So any questions for this part before we move on? So here we can also play a little bit more about that before we move on. So here we have the input value name1 or just name. It's a string. So we put a string here in the URL, but it can also be in other forms. So for example, we can have an integer. Okay, so the way we do that is, so for example, so this is a code that I played with before. So here we can have number 1 plus number 2. Okay, so this way we can also have integer and have some more interesting way of play with it. So let's have a try. So what if we have here as number 1 equals 2 and number 2. Sorry, we should have number 1 equals 2 and number 2 equals 5. Haha. Undefined. Good. Okay. Pineapple, number 1 and number 2. Yes, but the key here is that in addition to strings, we can also have other different types of input. Like for example, we can have integer and others. Okay. So we can have others, like for example, const week, query dot week. Okay, so thanks for sending the apple in week. Okay. So what we are going to do here is pineapple name. As we have name 1, we need to have 1 here, and week equals week 5. 5, perhaps only 5 here, and we put. The reason that we had undefined here is because we didn't save this file and restart the server. But we can have a look very soon. Like we terminate the server, restart it, and we put this here. So hi Yuchao, thanks for sending the apple in week 5. Okay, but here we are actually also sending through a string. Okay. Let's have a try again with this part. So this is what we are going to have. Okay, so what we are having is number 1 plus number 2. Okay. So let's have a try, restart this server, and we put in the information here as number 1 equals 2 and number 2 equals 5. Okay, so hi 7, thanks for sending the apple in week undefined, so we didn't have anything here. So probably we need to remove this part. We got a question in the chat, like, where do we get the express file? Okay, good question. How do we get the express file? So it's very similar to what we get any other npm library, any other npm packages. So the way you get that is through npm, as we just seen here. So express server. Okay. Oh, they didn't show here. How do we install the express server? But it's exactly the same as how we had other packages like Jest or a Nest node or whatever. It's exactly the same, like how we use other npms. But we should have something on the slide. No, but it's exactly the same. Okay, like npm install, whatever you want. Other questions in the chat? Will you be showing us how to set data, store the data? I'm not very clear about the question. Other question here, why do we need a pass? Okay, good question, this one. Why do we need a pass? So this is, yes, I didn't mention too much about the post, like other than get. The reason is that I do not want it to be too complicated, like too overwhelmed, too much information at this stage. So the reason that we had this pass is that we want to make it, like we talked about JSON like 2 weeks ago, and we talked about JSON pass, right? So we want to make it like a JavaScript structure so that we can use later for whatever, like if we have a very complex code. So this is an example, like very simple example, but we might need to use like in the object, what are the keys and values, strings or whatever we want to use it. So this is why we have JSON.parse. But we can also make it easier by using app useExpress.json. So different from the one here, like we can also use a different one so that we can avoid using like JSON pass or what we had here, JSON string file. So it simplifies stuff. It packs things in this express.json and make things easier for us. Okay, so that you can also have like just the body.name here. Does that answer your question? Okay. Let me show you another figure, like this one. So this is something that I found quite useful. So this figure here. So this is how REST API communicate with the client or the server. So you can see that everything from this API is JSON data. Okay, no matter what method we use, either it's get, post, put, or delete, we use JSON data. So the reason is that JSON is, like we mentioned in previous week, like JSON is very easy to read. It's human readable data structure, data type. Okay, so and it's very it is compatible with other languages like JavaScript or Python. It's easy to convert from JSON into JSON data, so that we for REST APIs we have JSON data here. No matter which method we use, the output is always JSON data. Okay, all good? Okay, so what about let's have a quick break before we move on. Okay, so now it's 10:51. What about we come back at 11 and we can move on to the other content in the lecture. Okay, have a quick break, 10 minutes. Hello, welcome back. I hope you had a good break. I noticed that in the chat, like you're asking more about the parts and the string 5 bits. Okay, sure, no problem. So let's have a look at here. Okay, so the reason is that when we receive information or we receive data from a web server, the data is always a string. Okay, but we want to make it a JavaScript object. So for here, this example here, it doesn't play much with what we get from the web server. It just directly sends it or directly send it here. It doesn't do much things about that here. But in more complex cases, like the server, our Express server or other server, we might want to do more than just send this data. So we need to have it in a JavaScript object so that we can have more powerful, we can use the more powerful programming language. Like JSON it's a text-based data structure, as we mentioned. So it doesn't have any structure in it. Okay, so if we want to do more about the data we get from web server, we need to better use a JavaScript object. Does it answer your question? I think the reason that you're asking about that, like why we do that, perhaps is because this example does not make that much sense here because we only want to display the message here or whatever. It's just showing you how we use get or the Express server thing. Okay. I hope it's more clear now. Yes, I'm replying to the chat. Like, what the data we receive from the web server, the data is always a string. Okay, it's not a JavaScript object, so there's no structure. Okay, more questions coming in the chat. But let's say you want to add numbers. Yes, that's why like we have the pass in here, right? And the data we get directly is still a string, but we want to decode it into an integer. So we have part int so that we can do the plus here. Yes, it does not make sense at string, so that is why we use pass int. We made an integer. Yes, that's what the part int is for. Yes, you are right. Does it make sense? Okay. Perhaps we can discuss more at the end of lecture if we have time left. I think it better, or I'm not sure if others all understand or not, but we'll come back to this at the end of lecture if we have some time left. Okay, so before we move on, I got a question about like the port that we normally use, like I mentioned, like reserved ports. So we use the port 3001 here, but there, like which port we can use. So this is the question. Okay, so ports 3000 is commonly used. We can always use port 3001, 3012, and a port is for web browser, web server. It's a number that used to identify or specify a specific service or application running on that server. Okay, so if multiple people working on, so for example, local hosts here trying to access the same port, it will conflict. So when you are working on VLab or, so VLab is actually, we use that, so as a server, right? So if we use the same port at the same time, there might be a conflict. So when you are doing our iteration 2 projects, if there's a conflict, just try to use different port. And there are some reserved port, such as port 80, I think, and so those are reserved, but all of them are under 1024. So if you use any other port number that is beyond 1024, that should be fine. Okay, so this is one question we got. Let me have a look. Yeah, and also to reinforce like why we use localhost, like why we play with the server on a local computer is that before we deploy our application, our service on the internet, it's better to have everything play locally and make sure everything works well fine before we publish it. So this is the reason for it. Okay. All right, and I also briefly shown the APIs. So for example, let's have a look at this API. So there are some like open source API, like when you're building your application or service, is that you can use. It's very similar to it's like a more complex function that you give an input and you get an output. So this one is an API that you can use to get access to the weather data. Okay, so they will also give you some parameters here, and it's very similar to what we gave just now to like name and number and week in the URL. Okay, so this is their API call, and they will specify their parameters here. And here's an example of the API call and an example of API response. You can also have a look here. Okay, so there are many API, more examples. So for example, Google Map API. So it's also quite often used in some small business website that you can see there's a Google Map. They probably mainly use the Google Map APIs. Okay, so there are a lot of APIs that you can play with, perhaps not at this stage, but in the future. Okay, cool. Yep, let me have a look if there's any more questions. Okay, should be fine. Just also to clarify one thing here, like the client here, like communicate with server, it doesn't necessarily have to be a user. It can also be an application or a software system that use this API, and the client here doesn't necessarily to be an actual user. Okay, and the machine that give the resources to a client is this server. Just to clear any questions. Okay, cool. So one more question about like JSON. So all require get everything back in JSON. Yeah. Okay. I hope the information today did not overwhelm you. I think the reason that I continued with Jake's lecture last week on HDV is because this lecture is quite important for our iteration 2. I'm not sure whether you have studied iteration 2, but if you haven't, it's always better to start as early as possible. And one important part of iteration 2 is that we are going to have, so let me show you perhaps so that, all right, so this is, I will get back to the iteration 2 later if we have time left today. Okay. Yes, okay, so now let's have a look like how we communicate with the server through code. So what we did just now is we put some inputs in the URL and then we get some thing displayed on the browser that we can see. Okay, so it's very similar to the way that we did before when we console log something and we test, see if it works as what we want. Okay, so it's not scalable. And when we talk about testing, we introduced the concept, we introduced Jest testing, right? So it's kind of a scalable way of doing tests. So with the request the server, so we can also use very similar ways of doing the testing, like very similar way of communicating with the server. So the way we do that is through another npm package. We use a lot of npm package. So the one we are using is called sync request. Okay, and the way that we can get the sync request package is through npm install sync request. Okay, and here's an example code here. And we can send them to our previous server that we had. So let's have a very quick look at this code. It has a request. The method that we are using is get, and the URL here is Apple, and the input we give is name Hayden. Okay, and then we console log here. So let's have a try. Okay, so this is the code. It's exactly the same as what we had on the slide. So you can also copy and paste and play with it. Okay, so first of all, before we run this code, we need to have the server running properly. So instead of we run this 4.2 CRUD, what about we run this one? So as it's the same as this 4.2 CRUD. It's the only difference is that we use express.json instead of express text, and we have the code more condensed and use res JSON. So let's take this opportunity and try this code. CRUD and JSON. Okay, cool. So now the server is running. So let's have another terminal. Yeah. Okay, so let's have a try. Request. Yeah, missing throughout the name. Sorry, 1 second. I need to change the name of the file. Okay, yeah, so here's the reason. Let's have a look. So the way we use that is very similar to what we did before with Jest testing. So we still remember, like with Jest testing, we run npm run Jest and the test.ts. The file name is test.ts, right? So it's very similar to what we did with that. So let's have a look at this package first. npm package. So this is the one that we are using. No, it's not this one. Let's get the sync request. Yes, so this is the one that we are using. You can see that the weekly download is also a very popular one. And the way we install it is through npm install. And the use is also quite straightforward. Like we have a request. So this is how we include the library. So it's similar to what we used in this example here. So we import the request from sync request. Okay, and then we request, and the method we use is get, and we give the URL. We can ignore these headers here, and then we console log the body. Okay, so it's very similar. So so this is how we use that. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on, and so it can also have other other method used with sync request. So for example, post. Okay, and also the others. Okay, so now the important part is what we want to do is we want to test with scale. So we want to scaling the test with the code we have. So what we are using is also a Jest testing. Okay, so at the first glance, this code may be a little bit long, but let's work at it step by step. So, okay, so here is it. So let's ignore the last part. So let's only have a look at here. So as this is exactly the same as what we have seen in here. So we have get, so the method, and we also have this URL as shown here. Okay. We also have this QS. So this is similar to what we put in the URL. Like we put a question mark, we put name equals to Yuchao, but here we use the way like QS, and it's called a query string. Okay, and we put the value of name here, so we can put Yuchao here. And then let's have a look at here. So expect to be, does it look similar? Very familiar, right? So it's the same as what we did before with Jest testing. So we compare the what we get from the code as what we want it to be. So we expect it to be like, hi Yuchao, thanks for sending the apples. So this is what we expect. Okay. Okay, so to make sure this code can work, we also need to have something here, which is this jestconfig.js file. So you do not need to worry too much about that. It's already in your iteration 2 project code. And also, we also need to have this tsconfig JSON file. So you also do not need to concern about that. So we provide all this to you. So it's already in your iteration 2. The repo is already there. Okay, so having these two, then our Jest testing can work. Okay, so if you want to play locally, not in your iteration 2 project, you will need to have these 2 files. Okay, so let's have a try. npm run ts node. Yeah, this is what we need. npm run Jest testing, right? And it runs. Okay, great, it works. I was worried it's not working. Okay, cool, it works. So the test suite, one pass and test two pass. So the reason that we have two pass here because we test both apple and we test orange. Okay, so the orange here is, I had it before. It's very similar to what we had here for test apple. It's only that we have get here and we have post here. Okay, and the URL is different, like the apple, like we defined before, is here. Okay, and orange. Okay, and we also have expected to be. Okay, so what if I change something? So for example, hi Yuchao, thanks for sending the apples and a little bit more here. So if I change this test code, it should fail. Yes, it fails. So it's exactly the same, and it's showing here very clearly indicate like why it failed. Right. So we have extra here. Okay. Okay. Cool. Checking the questions. All right. So you will be playing with this HTTP and the lecture content today in your iteration 2. So if you do not get everything, no stress again. So if you play with it in your labs, week 5, like so this is this week, and also in your iteration 2. Okay, it's always similar. It's always the same that when we just watch the lecture, a lot of things doesn't make sense. So it's very, very common and you do not need to stress at all. I had the same experience before. So only when you really practice with it, things will more and more and gradually make sense to you. And also for many colleagues, so today's lecture is more than enough for your iteration 2 and your labs. So if there are small pieces that you cannot really understand, it's totally fine. It should be fine but we always encourage you to learn as much as you want. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I got Linda had like writing test is so annoying. But writing test is also so important. Yeah, Rob Pack last week, he also mentioned that debugging and testing is an important part as a software engineering, as a developer. It's not directly related to any functions, any features, but it ensures that your function features work smoothly. Okay, so and also have using Jest testing or as well like linting, like we discussed before. It really helps you in the process. It makes your life already easier. So it would be better that after you read a lot of code and then you come back and say, oh, it's not working. It will be even worse. So having tests and also the pipelines is really helpful, right? Yes, I had in the chat. There's just so many things to debug and test. I know. I really get you. Yes, this is always the case, but it's important. It's also a good practice that you have in sufficient tests, and also debugging is also a good way of learning a language, I think. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense, right? Yeah, it's an important part of our daily life, like debug, and also yeah, debug and test. I know, but it's important. As long as you get familiar with doing tests or debug, I think it'll be easier for you. At the beginning, it's always a bit hard. It's different from like our experience before. Like we want to have features, we have more and more features. But when we are get used to have those testing and get used to the daily life with debugs, we'll get used to it. I used to hate it as well. So yeah, I really get you. Okay, so what's more? This is Jest, yes. Okay, how to wrap into project. So in general, iteration 2 requires that you implement an HTTP server. So this is why this lecture is very important. However, many of the rules that exist in iteration 2 are just wrappers of your iteration 1 functions. So for example, login, tokens, or some other pieces of the function that you may already have in your iteration 1. We only need to wrap it for the HTTP server. Therefore, it should be easy to wrap your iteration 1 functions with an HTTP server. Most of the server stuff you do is just routing, gathering bodies, and returning responses. And treating your iteration 1 function like black boxes, like what we do with the npm packages and what we do with others. Okay, so I hope it's not that complex. Optional. Did you know we can make node and auto restart if new files are compiled? Okay, so this is good. So what we did before, I struggle a little bit here. Like whenever I change the code, I need to restart the server, and then I can get what I want. So sometimes it can be a little bit time consuming, a lot of extra work to do. Like you need to restart the server, everything, you change anything. So there's way that can help us make our life easier. And the way we do it is through this one. Okay, so I also do not have this package on my laptop. So what about we install this package together? Okay, so the way we do it is we npm install it. Okay, I will do it here. Okay, very quickly, it's done. All right, and replace node with nodman in package. Do I have that? I think it should be this one. Is it a typo? It should be JSON, right? Replace node with. Where is it? I also haven't used that before. Oh, it's already here. I didn't know I already had that. Okay, so, oh, no, it's just I installed it, but doesn't mean that I have it already working. All right. I will play with it later, but you can. But the point here is that once you have installed this node1, you do not need to, like what I did, like restart the server again and again whenever I change something in the code for my server. I only need to command S, like save the file, and automatically I will get the new version, the new one. Okay. I got a question in the chat. I'm still a little bit confused with what wrapping is. Yes, so you are talking about the iteration 2. So what wrapping is, we are reusing some of your code in your iteration 1. So we are not writing from scratch. So this is what I meant by wrapping. Yes, I also got someone answer your question in the chat. Like your functions keep their functionalities, wrapping another function. So yes, just use your function that you already had from your iteration one. That is what we meant by wrapping. It's not a terminology for software engineering or whatever. It's just a way that we think is help you understand like what we iteration two works and what we'll do with iteration two. Okay. Yeah. Okay, cool. So this is the content for HTTP. I hope it's not too overwhelmed. I already skipped some optional part, like make sure that we cover only the most important part, uh, like for your life as a software engineering and also for this course and for the projects. Okay, but there are also some optional part that you can look into if you are interested in. So for example, uh, here we skipped some part. Yes, so how we use the ARC as well as how we use the web browser to communicate with the APIs. Okay, so yeah, but the most important part is how we use Jest testing for the testing. Yeah, so this is the important part, like how we communicate with the server. Okay, yeah, in the chat, like so the old function becomes like a helper function in the yes, you are right. That's right. Okay, as we have some time left, so what about we look at the iteration two together? Great. So iteration two, I need to log in. So it will be using what we have learned last week and this week. So mainly from week 4 and week 5. We haven't finished everything for the iteration 2 yet. So because we haven't talked about next lecture, which is here. Yes, so we haven't talked about persistence yet, but we have talked about HTTP servers. Okay, and you can, yeah, but you can already start with your iteration two. So our most important advice for all groups, like also previous term, is the same. Like start your iteration two as early as possible. You already learned about linting, you already learned about TypeScript, so it's already enough that it just kickstart with the iteration two. Okay, so let's have a look at iteration two. So iteration two is mainly about building a web server that we talk about today. Okay, so yeah, so the first thing that you are expected to do is make adjustments to your existing code as per feedback given by your tutor for iteration one. Yeah, so this is also very important. It's also a good practice in software engineering that there's a term for it, but we haven't yet introduced it. So we have we work in sprints, like iterations, that each iteration is built on previous iteration, and we always get feedback in the loop, and we work on those feedback so that we can adjust where needed. So this is also very important as part of software engineering. Okay, and the second part is migrated to TypeScript. So we had JavaScript files from iteration one. We need to change those .js file extension to .ts. So you can do it through command line, but you can also just click on the click on the file and change the file name, change the extension to .ts. Okay, so other things that you might need to do to migrate into TypeScript is that you need to give them a tab. So for example, the email here, string, password string. So here's an example. Okay, so here's a sample conversion. Okay, and the next part would be implement and test the HTTP Express server according to the entire interface provided in the spec. Okay, so we talk about HTTP Express server, which is great that you can start working on this part. Okay, the same as the previous iteration, that part of it will be auto marked. Okay, yeah, and here we also mentioned here that your implementation should build upon your work in iteration 1. Okay, and you do not need to work from scratch, like write everything from scratch. A question in the chat, do we need to use pipelines for iteration 2? Yes. Unfortunately, yes. But yes, it's good, like it's a good practice, as I mentioned. Yes, we are using pipeline in iteration 2. And also, for iteration 2, you will be given a front end, but you do not need to worry too much about that. It might not work at this stage. Okay, so we build a front end for you, but you do not need to worry about that at the moment. Okay. Yep. Anything else important? Yes, linked. We also talk about linked. So here's a good practice here that you can practice linked. And we also have, so we mentioned about TSC. So we mentioned about TS node. We also briefly mentioned about TSC. So did you remember? What about I put in here? In the terminal, I'm still running the server. So we talk about a TS node, right? And we also talk about TSC. So what TSC does is that it checks all the tabs in the folder. Okay, so it is also good for you to see if you are following good tab safety practice, but it's not required at this stage. Oops, where's my iteration 2? Oh, it's here. Okay, cool. Great. Here, you must do this before merging anything from. So meaning, do you remember that we mentioned about the green tag? So we need to make sure that the master is always stable. Okay. Continue demonstrating effective project management and effective Git usage. So this is the same with iteration 1. So if you get any feedback on this from iteration 1, it's a good opportunity for you to do some more practice and do better and also get better marks on it, of course. Oh yes, here is what I just mentioned about npm run tsc. Okay, to check all the tab errors. And this is recommended, it's optional, but it's also good for you as a learner. Yeah, and here it also mentioned that a front end has been built that you can use, okay? And feel free to make changes to the front end code, but it's also optional, okay? So iteration 2 is sometimes like we get feedback from previous term that iteration 2 is a little bit harder, like more difficult than iteration 1. And also, but we give more time to it. It's for iteration 1 and iteration 0, for each iteration we have 2 weeks. But for iteration 3, we have 3 weeks. Okay, but we always suggest that to get started early, especially we are going to have week 6 next week, which is the flexible week that we do not have lectures, but we need to keep on working whenever you had an opportunity. Because if you start working after week 6, when you come back from the flexible week, things will be very, very, like time will be very, very tight. It will be really difficult. And also, as you have mentioned, like each iteration is built on the previous iteration. Okay, so now you are working on iteration 2, building on iteration 1. And when you are working on iteration 3, you will still be working, like building on previous iterations. Okay, so we do not want your second iteration to influence your performance for the following iterations. And also, this year we introduced new iteration 4, which replaced the exam in previous terms. I personally prefer projects instead of exams. I know exam can be like stressful for some of you or some of us. And it's also good, like iteration 4 will be 30% of the final marks. So if you learn a lot, like try to learn better in iteration 2 and 3, you will have a much better chance of get a good performance on your iteration 4. So we are trying to be as open as possible for iteration 4, meaning that it will be different from iteration 0 to 3, that we have very specific, very detailed spec here, like what we want here and there. But for iteration 4, will be we try to be as open-ended as possible, so you can practice whatever you want and build your own API and do something interesting. Okay, so the reason that I'm talking about iteration 4 here is because I wish you to get started with iteration 2 early and learn as much as possible now, like learn by practice, like learn by doing, in addition to learn only through watching the lectures or working on exams like that. Okay, so any questions about iteration 2? Okay, looks like you are good. Yeah, let us know if you have any questions about iteration 2. Tomorrow, it will be in the Science Theater, and we'll be talking about here, persistence. Okay, and as you have noticed that tomorrow will be halfway through this term, like we almost done all the tough parts of this term. Okay, and then you will have some time to digest, to practice, to further understand what we have learned till now. And after that, we will have some less coding lectures. So for example, like requirements, design, like coding together. These are also very interesting, but I think will be easier than what we have learned in the previous half of the term. So relax, we'll have fun in the following weeks. Okay, cool. Are we going to cover HTML? I think so. If nothing changed, we will cover that. Yep. Okay, cool. And also, Jake is away this week and the following week, but I will be here. So if you are sending emails to the course, you can send to cs1531 at cse.unsw.edu.au. If you send to Jake's personal email, I think he will redirect to me anyway. I'm already annoyed by working on server. Why? It's so interesting. Like you have something like on the server, like, and it's if you can deploy it somewhere, you can already deploy it. It's so exciting. Like I'm very, very excited that we are talking about these servers. If time permits, would you mind talking about error handling with response.json? And I used to working on this website project in other school. All right. I hope you can have a better experience this during this project. Okay. Yeah, there's so much stuff happening in this course. I know, especially for the first half, like the first 5 weeks, I would say. A lot of information, a lot of content, but you will have like easier life after this week, after the break. We will talk about more interesting and less overwhelming contents, I would say. Um, but although a lot of information, but I don't think there's anything is less important that we can remove it. Um, yeah, but if there's anything that you do not fully understand at this stage, it's absolutely normal and you do not need to worry too much about it. As in, if you are working in software engineering, majored in software engineering or related one, or others, if you're interested, there are more like courses after this one, like 2011 and 3011 or 3111. So you are going to practice a lot of this again and again, and you will understand them better and better. So this is an introductory course, like fundamental course. So if you do not fully understand everything, it's fine. Like we still have half of the term to go. Like you can practice and you can learn, you can understand better. Hemming is still struggling with the strings. Yes. So whenever we receive data from the web server, the data is always a string. So remember this. So whenever we receive data from the web server, it's always a string. The data is always a string. Okay. All good? Yeah, otherwise I think that's all for today's lecture. Um, if you have any questions about iteration 2, please post on the forum and get started as soon as possible. Okay? Yep, all good. Thank you, everyone. Hopefully I can see you tomorrow in the Sun Theater in person tomorrow. Get started with iteration 2 as soon as possible. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, thank you. See you tomorrow.